The Sword in the Stone. Ages and ages and ages gone by, it was night of magical stones from heaven, a night that came to the Celtic people but one time a year, and a night that they always marked by 3 days of fasting. Now on that night of magical stones from heaven, Merlin was away in the highlands where those stones had been known to fall before, and anyone in Avalon still awake while they were watching the sky and praying as hard as they could. For enemies had entered the south of the country, and we knew that in just a few months those enemies would be at the gates of Avalon, and we needed those bits of heaven to bring us an advantage over our enemies. And when the night got the darkest, streaks began to appear across the sky, yellow and blue and an orangey white. And after a while a star appeared in the heavens and got brighter and brighter as it came closer and closer, and soon the song of the universe roared in Merlin's ears, and quick, in a clap like thunder and a cloud of steam and a sputtering of melting snow and mud, the song of the universe ended in a snowbank, and Merlin closed his eyes and he said, "Thank you." And before dawn pink the night sky, 5 stones fell close enough to where Merlin could collect 'em, put 'em in buckets of snow, load 'em on his horses, and headed back to Avalon. Now in the morning all the feasting preparations were being made in the great hall, for whether the gods smiled and brought us any magical stones or not, why we were all going to break our fast together and celebrate. And lamb and ox were roasting over the fire, and bread was baking, and puddings were cooking, and all of Avalon smelled most wondrous delicious. Well, there are a number of boys in town couldn't stand to listen to 3 days of hunger rumbling around inside their bellies and waiting for Merlin to get back, and so they made their way out the roadway a bit, until they found a great stout oak tree, and a few climbed up into the top branches where they could keep a lookout for Merlin's returning, and the others sat down in the shadows, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and after what seemed like just forever to those hungry boys, one at the top of the tree, he said, "I think I see him. I think Merlin's coming." And the ones at the bottom yelled up, "Are the horses weighed down? Is there steam from the buckets?" And the boys at the top strained for a moment, and then they said, "Aye, we can see steam coming out of 2 of the buckets, and indeed the horses look weighed down." And those boys down in the shadows, quick, just like arrows shot out of bowstrings, went running, yipping, hollering, tell anybody who'd listen, "Merlin's coming, and we got some magic stones." Well, before Merlin could make his way all the way back to the gates of Avalon, all the townfolk had assembled there at the gate. The Lady of the Lake, the Lady of Avalon herself right there in the front, and next to her Arthur and Merlin's 5 other apprentices. Now Arthur had been secreted away when he was just a wee baby, the only rightful heir, the only king who could unite the clans and bring them together as a force against this mounting foe. And he'd been secreted away and raised as an apprentice to Merlin in the blacksmith shop, in the hopes that a life of service in the blacksmith shop would prepare Arthur for a life of even greater service that as yet he knew nothing about. And before Merlin could get off his horse, people started yelling, "How many stones did we get, Merlin? What are you going to make, Merlin?" And Merlin hushed the crowd, and he said, 5 times we were blessed in the night, 5 magical stones from the heavens. And a wee little girl made her way up to the front, and she yanked on Merlin's linen robe, and she said, "Merlin, what are you going to make out of the first stone then? What will the first stone become?" And Merlin hefted out a stone about as big as that wee girl's head, and he said, "This stone, little one, this stone, we'll melt it down. It'll bring us more than 2,000 arrowheads, to bring us luck in the hunt, and luck fending away our enemies." Into a bucket that stone went, and one of his apprentices took it into the secret darkness of the blacksmith shop. "And the second stone, Merlin," said a voice from the crowd, "what will that second stone be?" And Merlin hefted down another bucket and gave it to an apprentice, And he said, "This stone? Why, this stone methinks will get 4 iron bands to wrap around our wagon wheels and chariot wheels. For if we put iron bands around our wagon and chariot wheels, we'll travel farther in a day, carry more weight, give us an advantage." And away that stone went. "And the 3rd stone, Merlin," said an old one in the back. "What will the 3rd stone be then?" And Merlin hefted down another bucket and gave it to an apprentice, and he said, "This stone? Why, that 3rd stone, it'll become an iron plough furrow to speed our farmers' work along. See if we can't put away some extra grain, withstand any siege that might be coming our way." And away that stone went. "And the 4th stone, Merlin," said one of the boys who'd been way in the tip-top of the tree. "What you make out of the 4th stone then?" And Merlin hefted down a 4th bucket and gave it to an apprentice, and he said, "With war coming, we're going to need medicines and poultices to heal our sick and our wounded. So that stone will become an iron cauldron for the Lady of Avalon, for the Lady of the Lake to mix up her medicines and poultices to heal our sick and our wounded." And away that stone went. Well, the Lady of Avalon got all caught up in excitement herself, and she turned to Merlin and said, "Then, Merlin, tell us all what the 5th stone will be. What will you make from the 5th stone?" And Merlin turned to the Lady of the Lake, and he bowed and he said, "My Lady of Avalon, the 5th stone is for you and I and Arthur alone to know for now, and if you would, excuse everyone to the feasting in the great hall. I'll be along presently to tell you all about it." And the Lady of Avalon turned to all assembled and said, "Let us be away to the feasting, and let us leave the blacksmiths to the white magic in the blacksmith shop." And almost as one, everybody turned and headed into the great hall, for with all the smells wafting out, and 3 days of hunger rumbling around in everybody's belly, why, she didn't have to ask twice. And then Merlin turned to Arthur, and he said, "Lad, in the morrow you and I alone will work this stone. But for now, I want you to turn it into a billet, fat as 3 fingers, wide as 3 fingers, as long as your forearm." And Arthur said, "Aye, Merlin, it will be done." And away Arthur went with the apprentices, and away Merlin went to make himself presentable for the feasting. And soon the ringing of the anvils filled Avalon like music, and the laughter and happy chatter coming out of the great hall, why, it made Avalon one of the best places in the whole wide world to be that day. Now in the morrow, before anybody appeared to be awake, Merlin made his way into the blacksmith shop, and sure enough, there was Arthur with that magical stone glowing just like Merlin had asked, fat as 3 fingers, wide as 3 fingers, and as long as Arthur's forearm. And then Merlin took his place on the master smith's side of the anvil, and Arthur took his place on the apprentice side of the anvil. And with not a word between them, they began the dance they'd practised over and over all these years, with Merlin tapping directions on the hot iron or on the anvil, and Arthur matching Merlin blow for blow. And after 100 heats, 100 trips into the forge fire and onto the face of the anvil, they stretched that billet long and thin and folded it. In it went again 100 more heats on the anvil and into the fire, until they stretched that billet long and thin and folded it. A 3rd time into the forge fire and onto the anvil 100 heats, until they drew it long and thin and folded it. And then Merlin began to tap directions on the hot iron and on the anvil, and together he and Arthur began to pull a sword from the stone. And as they pulled the sword from the stone, Merlin began to tell Arthur of his birthright, of how he was the son of Uther Pendragon, and the Lady Igraine, the Lady of the Lake's own sister, and that if he did pick up this sword and name it, he was accepting his commission as protector of the people, uniter of the clans, and rightful king. Now for a while, Arthur didn't make a move. He just marvelled at the sword they'd pulled from the stone, a sword unlike the world had ever seen, a sword as tall as me, that it would take a blacksmith's great heavy arms to lift and wield in battle. Now for a while, Arthur just stared at the mighty sword. In all his time in the blacksmith shop, he'd never seen anything like it. enemies would run at the sight of it, or fall at its owner's feet and pledge fealty rather than meet that noble lord on the battlefield. It flashed even in the dimness of the blacksmith shop, and sang with the song of the sirens with the tiniest tap upon the anvil. It was a mighty and terrible weapon, quenched in blood and oil and secrets known only to Merlin and Arthur. Merlin began to worry at Arthur's long silence as he marvelled at the sword, and Merlin worried that this life of service in a blacksmith shop hadn't quite prepared Arthur the way we'd hoped. But soon Arthur did pull the sword from Merlin's anvil and raised it above his head with his thick blacksmith arms, and he said, "I name this sword Excalibur, for it's 3 times blessed, never wrenched out of Mother Earth, 3 times forged and 3 times folded, a gift from the heavens above." And as you all know, Arthur did become king and united his people and brought peace for a time under that mighty sword Excalibur, a sword pulled out of a stone.